Let's look at the thoughtlessness and the mean-spiritedness of your very remarks that you made about Reverend Falwell.
By all means.
You think it's a pity that there isn't a hell for him to go to, you said.
Yes, I do.
On his death, you write, the discovery of the carcass of Reverend Falwell on the floor of his obscure office is in almost zero significance, except for perhaps two categories of people, etc. You also say the evil he did will live after him.
Yes.
I knew Reverend Falwell, Christopher. I know the good work that this man has done.
Tell me about it.
Well,
Takes a lot to make me cry.
I know you think you're the smartest guy in the room, but you sound like a jackass when you attack his family like this.
God will not be mocked, and when we destroy 40 million little innocent babies, we make God mad. I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
The controversial televangelist was a polarizing figure, emboldening conservative Christians while alienating many liberals, but there's no question about the impacting legacy Falwell leaves behind. Joining us now is Republican strategist Ralph Reed and author of God Is Not Great, columnist Christopher Hitchens, who made news last night with his harsh critique of the Reverend. Christopher, let me start with you here and talk about the things you've said, which obviously we know where you stand on religion, we know where you stand on Reverend Falwell. By being so angry about what his legacy was and is, are you not hurting his family and others who may have no dog in that hunt, but who would just like a few moments to celebrate his life and have some peace?
Well, I don't care whether his family's feelings are hurt or not. But if they are, they can take comfort from the extraordinary piety and stupidity and, generally speaking, uniformity of the coverage of the man's death. It is, after all, was said by the supposed Jesus of Nazareth to his followers that they must expect to be mocked for their beliefs, because their beliefs will appear to many people to be ridiculous, if not worse than that, and that they are to take it for granted that they will be ridiculed. That's true, I think, of the most devout and serious and thoughtful Christian. But for a vulgar fraud and crook like the Reverend Falwell, it's an obligation to say what one thinks about him, or be left off the air and have people like yourselves broadcasting only piety. And that
whatever. I'm not broadcasting only piety. I did my radio show, and now we're having you on here to talk about your view, very different than what else the media is saying.
You're having me on and then arguing that maybe it's bad taste to have me on. I don't think
well,
that's
I thought it was a legitimate
hospitable.
question, because I think people are wondering.
Yeah, well, I've answered it. I've answered the question.
You have, and I will now move on to Ralph Reed, now that you've answered that question.
Good.
Ralph, does Christopher Hitchens have a point? It is a free speech issue. He was a polarizing figure, Reverend Falwell was, and there are many people, maybe not all of them feeling as strong as Christopher Hitchens, but who feel that Reverend Falwell was indeed a polarizing figure. He said things that offended many Americans.
Well, you know, look, any time, Alan, that you are an agent of change the way Dr. Falwell was, who had the kind of impact that he had on American religion, on our culture, and on our politics, he was one of the most important historical figures of the last 50 years in each of those areas. Ending the self-imposed exile of evangelicals from civic and cultural engagement, and I think transforming them into one of the most important and vibrant and energetic constituencies in the entire electorate. No one does that, liberal or conservative, Republican, Democrat, of any faith, and not stir controversy. But it's just my belief as an American, not as a conservative, not as somebody of any particular denominational background or faith, but just as an American, in terms of elevating the civility of our discourse, that when somebody dies, that we ought to show a measure of respect and appreciation for their family and for their loved ones and for those who are grieving right now, and our thoughts and prayers ought to be with them, regardless of whether we agree with Dr. Falwell.
Christopher Hitchens.
Oh, come on.
Christopher.
Play the world's smallest violin. Listen, he established a business, a racket, in my opinion. He was a religious businessman in the same way as Mr. Ralph Reed is a religious entrepreneur. He's left the business to his children. It's a hereditary job. Let that console them. You can't have me on and say that I have to say, I'm terribly sorry he's dead.
Hey, Christopher.
One reason you can't ask me to do that is because I am not. I think we have been rid of an extremely dangerous demagogue who lived by hatred of others and prejudice, and who committed treason by saying that the United States deserved the attack upon it and its civil society in September 2001 by other religious nutcases like himself.
He profoundly and repeatedly apologized, and I'm sure you're perfect in your life. I'm sure you're perfect in your life, and that you've never made any mistakes.
I've never committed treason like that. I don't believe in the sincerity of his apology.
Let's look at the thoughtlessness and the mean-spiritedness of your very remarks that you've made about Reverend Falwell.
By all means.
You think it's a pity that there isn't a hell for him to go to, you said.
Yes, I do.
On his death, you write, the discovery of the carcass of Reverend Falwell on the floor of his obscure office is almost zero significance except for perhaps two categories of people, etc. You also say the evil he did will live after him.
Yes.
I knew Reverend Falwell, Christopher. I know the good work that this man has done.
Tell me about it.
Well, for
takes a lot to make me cry.
I know you think you're the smartest guy in the room, but you sound like a jackass when you attack his family like this. But I know what he did for unwed mothers. I know what he did for alcoholics. I know what he did for drug addicts.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I did not attack his family, and no fair-minded view of yours will say that. I'm not going to be conscripted into saying that it's my job when you invite me on to discuss this man, first to say how sorry I am for him and his family. That isn't what I feel. You, no doubt, as a Christian, or whatever you are, require hypocrisy of people. I'm sorry you're asking the wrong person.
No, but I am asking for human decency, and if you don't think it has an impact on his family, to use even the phrases tonight, that he's vulgar, fraud, and a crook, and then to say that the discovery of his carcass, I think you are incredibly mean, incredibly selfish, and incredibly thoughtless.
You invited me, sir, to give my opinion of the departed. I give it to you, and you say, well, might that not upset his family? I said it while he was alive.
Give his opinion
might that not have upset his family too?
You give the opinion about him, and I'm giving the opinion about you and the thoughtlessness of your remarks here. And I'm really calling for any human decency that you may have in your pseudo-intellectually superior mind of yours.
More of the debate on this coming up in a moment, and later an unbelievable video of a toddler.
And we continue now. Republican strategist Ralph Reed and columnist and author Christopher Hitchens. You know, Christopher, I interviewed you a little bit about your book just a short time ago. It made me think a lot. Jerry Falwell, because I do know him, he does a lot for people that are in trouble. He gave a lot of scholarships to his school. He helped women that were pregnant and needed help. He'd give them food and a place to live and an education. He did a lot to people that are alcoholics and et cetera, et cetera. You have your hostility towards religion, and that's without saying. You know, I just wonder, when you compare his life, there are a lot of good atheist communists out there like Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot, and, they slaughtered millions. Jerry Falwell slaughtered nobody in his life. He may have misspoke once or twice, but he devoted his life to his religion. Do you have nothing good to say about him at all?
No, I repeat, Jerry Falwell lived on hatred and superstition and bigotry. He preached dislike of people whose lives he knew nothing about. He raised money from credulous fools.
You don't know anything about his life.
Now, excuse me, sir. You can either ask me on and ask my opinion, or you may not. But I don't have to be here if you're going to take that attitude.
Well, you could leave.
You spent the first half by saying I had no right to the opinion you'd asked me on to express. Now, you're tiring me out. I repeat, though.
No, what I said is your opinion was thoughtless. What you wrote was crude and mean and hateful. That's what I said.
You took up all the time for my answer with your long, rather unlettered question.
Oh, okay.
Jerry Falwell made a career out of sponsoring dislike and superstition, said that people he didn't like were going to hell, said the United States deserved to be attacked by Islamic fascists, said he believed that people would be raptured into heaven, leaving all the rest of us to wallow behind. I think his death is a deliverance. And if you say that someone who occasionally makes a charitable donation is a good person, then you have to say that Hamas and Hezbollah, who do all this charitable giving and charitable organizing, are the same.
In a country that celebrates it, Ralph Reed.
Sean, look,
and why not a word now from the friend of Jack Abramoff?
Wait, we only have a moment here, Ralph. Here's an important question about. Well, let me get Ralph in here. Here's an important question about Jerry Falwell.
That's all it needs now. Let's hear from the Abramoff faction.
We only have a moment left. Ralph gets to speak
rip-off artists. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Hold on, Christopher. Ralph, the big controversy about Jerry Falwell was he fused religion and politics. And that's what people will be debating, I guess, going forward. And after he said he would not do such a thing, would Jesus have advocated the GOP, and was he right to bring in and marry those two and give that impression? We only have a very short time left, Ralph.
Well, I don't think that's ever what Dr. Falwell said. What he said was that there were certain transcendent values, such as the protection of innocent human life, the sanctity of marriage, the need to defend the state of Israel, his opposition to communism, his opposition to
need to
radical
defend the Israeli occupation.
jihadism, and what he believed was that those values should be reflected in public policy. And I think that, you know, when you have a community of Liberty University with its 10,000 students in residence, you have 22,000 members of his church, you have millions of others of people who looked up to him and admired him. I would really hope that people like Christopher would show the decency and respect to let those people mourn
Tell it to Jack
and remember
Abramoff.
his memory
Tell
without
it
being
to Jack
torn down
Abramoff.
and attacked.
Tell it to your business partner.
Good try,
Reverend
Christopher.
Falwell
Tell it
was
to your
a
religious
personal
racketeer
friend of mine,
friends.
and I'll miss him. When we come
If you
back,
gave
if Toddler
Falwell
gets
an
too
enema,
close
he could
to
be buried in
a
a
dancing
matchbox.
performance in Times Square.
When a religious leader builds power by judging others, his legacy deserves honesty, not polite silence. The Bible itself says, "By their fruits you will know them," in Matthew 7:16. So the record matters. Falwell blamed groups like gays, feminists, and secular people after 9/11, then apologized when backlash came. That kind of politics uses faith as a weapon. Charity does not erase public harm, especially when fear and prejudice helped build the platform.
To move on to the Reverend Jerry Falwell's funeral. You won't believe what one of my next guests is saying about his legacy.
It shows how much vulgarity and fraud and bigotry you can get away with on mainstream airwaves in this country as long as you have the word reverend in front of your name.
Atheist Christopher Hitchens takes on Jerry Falwell's legacy, as well as one of the Reverend's admirers, next. He opened tonight the controversy over the legacy of the Reverend Jerry Falwell. Falwell died last week of heart trouble at the age of 73. At his funeral today, thousands of mourners packed the Virginia church Falwell founded 50 years ago, the church he built into an evangelical empire. Falwell was a polarizing figure in American politics for decades, thanks to the Moral Majority, the organization he founded to promote his vision of American values. At the service today, the Reverend Franklin Graham said those values are what made him controversial.
He believed in the inerrancy of Scripture. That's controversial. He believed in the sanctity of life, was against abortion. That's controversial. He believed in the family. And who would have ever thought that would be controversial? He believed in marriage was the union between a man and a woman. He believed that the moral decay weakened the fabric of America. That's controversial.
Joining me now, to debate Falwell's legacy, writer Christopher Hitchens, who says Falwell was a fraud. Hitchens' latest book is God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Also with me, someone who sees Falwell's legacy much differently, writer Eric Metaxas, author of Everything Else You Always Wanted to Know About God, but Were Afraid to Ask. Gentlemen, glad to have you both. Christopher, let me start with you. Falwell was controversial. You heard the Reverend Graham say it right there. Isn't that a good thing? You're controversial. It gets people thinking and discussing and debating.
To be sure, and I wouldn't be on this show if you weren't giving me the opportunity to be rude about a man on the day he's buried.
You've called Reverend Falwell a horrible little person, a vulgar fraud, and a crook. You've also said it's a pity there isn't a hell for him to go to.
Do you want to just spend all your time whimpering about what I've said, or do you have any comments?
Whimpering. No, I'm curious why you think he was such an idiot. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of people that followed him and believed in him. Are you saying that everybody that believed in him?
That's been true. That's been true of every fraud in history. I'll tell you why I think so. First, he believed in the rapture, in the idea that people like him were going to be snatched up, especially by Jesus, leaving the rest of us to die in the cars.
But hold on. Didn't you say that you don't think he believed in those things?
He believed in creation. He believed in creationism.
You said he didn't believe in those things.
He believed that the Antichrist was a Jewish male who was already amongst us.
Excuse me, the Christ was also a Jewish male. The Christ was a Jewish male. If you believe he existed, I'm not sure that you do. But the point is that I get confused.
I'm not sure that he did, no.
Pardon? Well, you're not sure he did. But the point is to say something like that. You're being merely incendiary, because the other day you said you didn't believe that.
Wine again.
Well, you said whimper earlier. You have to pick your pejorative verb. But the point is that you can't have it both ways. And I'm not trying to be incendiary, but I'm trying to figure out what your actual criticism is, because you can't say that somebody believed these things and that's why he's a crackpot and an idiot, and then say that he only was in it for the money, because that's what you were saying the other day.
He didn't say only for the money, but he used it
You
as
said
a
he didn't believe
fundraiser,
these
certainly.
things.
He did very well out of it. I can't be sure. He may have been both a hypocrite and a bigot.
Eric, what does he leave behind?
Division, obviously, in some ways. I mean, I think his legacy is certainly mixed. The things that Falwell believed in as a Christian are the things that any Christian believes in. And I think he, in some ways, very helpfully brought people who felt that they were out of the political process into the political process. And I think in some ways that was wonderful. I think it also contributed to a misunderstanding about what faith is. And I think that a lot of people confuse having faith as a Christian or a Jew particularly with morality.
I think that if you want to an encapsulation of his legacy, it shows how much vulgarity and fraud and bigotry you can get away with on mainstream airwaves in this country as long as you have the word reverend in front of your name.
You don't think
Even if you've
Falwell
only
had you don't think Falwell was genuine at all in any way, shape, or form?
No, I think he was a genuine bigot, but I also think it's quite compatible with him being a huckster, a fundraiser, a friend of the Jim and Tammy Bakers, for example, and other rip-off artists, and a fraud. Yeah, he was amply both of those things.
But the things that you said only hours after he'd been pronounced dead, I thought were very unhelpful and exceedingly...
I said them all the time he was alive.
Well,
I said them every day he was alive
but that's
as well.
the point.
Final thought.
I think that, again, here's the point, at least, is that if you have legitimate criticisms, and of course you do, I would be the first to say that you do, you don't help your argument by saying them in the way that you did.
Oh, I'll be the judge of that. Leave that to me, Mr. Matakis. I'll make my own case.
Why?
Thanks.
Eric
I didn't ask your advice, and I really don't think I'd profit from it.
Here I am to offer it.
We must leave it there. I appreciate you both and the debate. Thank you.
Anytime.
Religion gets special protection in public life, even when its claims fall apart under evidence. Creationism asks people to reject biology, fossils, genetics, and deep time. Science does not need threats of hell or promises of heaven. It tests claims and corrects mistakes. The rapture idea is built from verses like 1 Thessalonians 4:17, but after 2,000 years, the prediction machine is still empty. That is not truth. That is fear dressed up as faith.
I need about 20 more years to accomplish what my vision for the university is.
20 years?
I need at least another 20 years, so that's how I'm praying. In the Bible, there's a story of a guy named Hezekiah who was dying, and he asked God for 15 additional years, and he got it. Well, I'm praying the same prayer with an option to renew.
And do you think you'll get it?
I don't know.
Christian Almanpour talking to the Reverend Jerry Falwell several months ago, hoping for more years on his life. Reverend Falwell, of course, died today after a life of faith and controversy. We've heard many voices in the last hour and a half discussing Falwell's life and his legacy. Here on 360, we believe in giving all sides a chance to air their views. You, the viewer, can come to your own conclusions. In a moment, we'll hear from Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, who has fond memories of Jerry Falwell as a friend and a pastor. First, a very different point of view, though, a representation of another side of viewpoint toward Jerry Falwell from author and outspoken atheist Christopher Hitchens. He's the author of God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. I spoke to him earlier in the program. Christopher, I'm not sure if you believe in heaven, but if you do you think Jerry Falwell is in it?
No, and I think it's a pity there isn't a hell for him to go to.
What is it about him that brings up such vitriol?
The empty life of this ugly little charlatan proves only one thing, that you can get away with the most extraordinary offenses to morality and to truth in this country if you'll just get yourself called reverend. Who would, even at your network, have invited on such a little toad to tell us that the attacks of September the 11th were the result of our sinfulness and were God's punishment if they hadn't got some kind of clerical qualification? People like that should be out in the street shouting and hollering with a cardboard sign and selling pencils from a cup. The whole consideration of this horrible little person is offensive to very, very many of us who have some regard for truth and for morality and who think that ethics do not require that lies be told to children by evil old men. That we're not told that people who believe like Falwell will be snatched up into heaven, where I'm glad to see he skipped the rapture, just found on the floor of his office, while the rest of us go to hell. How dare they talk to children like this? How dare they raise money from credulous people on their huckster-like Elmer Gantry radio stations and fly around in private jets as he did, giggling and sniggering all the time at what he was getting away with. Do you get an idea now of what I mean to say?
Yeah, no, I think you're making yourself very clear. I mean,
how dare he say, for example, that the Antichrist is already present amongst us and is an adult male Jew, while all the time fawning on the worst elements in Israel, with his other hand pumping anti-Semitic innuendos into American politics, along with his friends Robertson and Graham.
And yet there are...
encouraging the most extreme theocratic fanatics and maniacs on the West Bank and in Gaza not to give an inch of what he thought of as holy land to the people who already live there, undercutting and ruining every Democrat and secularist in the Jewish state in the name of God. He's done us an enormous disservice by this sort of demagogy.
What do you think it says about America and politics in America that he was so successful in mobilizing huge swaths of the country to come out and vote?
I'm not certain at all that he did deserve this reputation.
You don't think he does?
Well, I'm not certain that he was a mobilizer. We certainly hoped to be one. Well, the fact is that the country suffers to a considerable extent from paying too much by way of compliment to anyone who can describe themselves as a person of faith. Jimmy Swaggart, Ted Haggard, Chaucerian frauds, people who are simply pickpockets, and frauds who prey on the gullible.
Do you believe he believed what he spoke?
And the unwary? Of course not. He woke up every morning, as I say, pinching his chubby little flanks and thinking, I've got away with it again.
You think it was a complete fraud, really?
Yes.
You don't believe that, I mean, in his reading of the Bible, you don't think he was sincere in his, I mean, whether you agree or not with his reading the Bible, you don't think he was sincere in what he spoke?
No. I think he was a conscious charlatan and bully and fraud. I think if he read the Bible at all, and I would doubt that he could actually read any long book at all, that he did so only in the most hucksterish, as we say, Bible-pounding way. I'm going to repeat what I said before about the Israeli question. It's very important. Jerry Falwell kept saying to his own crowd, yeah, you've got to like the Jews because they can make more money in 10 minutes than you can make in a lifetime. He was always full, as his friends Robertson and Graham are and were, of anti-Semitic innuendo, yet in the most base and hypocritical way, he encouraged the worst elements among Jewry. He got Menachem Begin to give him the Jabotinsky Medal, celebrating an alliance between Christian fundamentalism and Jewish fanaticism that has ruined the chances for peace in the Middle East. Lots of people are going to die and are already leading miserable lives because of the nonsense preached by this man.
The book is God is Not Great. Christopher Hitchens, appreciate you being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Christopher Hitchens, his comments have provoked a great deal of email, positive and negative, we should say. We'll read some of your comments ahead. On the radar tonight, your reaction to Jerry Falwell's passing and our coverage of it. Some of you taking issue with our interview with outspoken atheist Christopher Hitchens. Lindsay in Indianapolis writes us, I hope you'll apologize to America for allowing someone on your show that would call this man a toad, as Mr. Hitchens said, or Hitcherson as she's called him. What would people think if I came on national television calling Ellen DeGeneres a lesbian toad? Lindsay, I'm not sure what Ellen DeGeneres has to do with it, but we believe in presenting multiple points of view on 360. You seem to assume that I agree with all the guests that I have on. I don't, but I don't think that really matters. What I think doesn't really matter. We invite people on if they have legitimate points of view. Falwell was certainly a divisive figure, and we thought it important to hear why. Sue, on the other hand, in San Jose, says, thank God AC360 included Mr. Christopher Hitchens on the show tonight. Mr. Hitchens' comments about Falwell were stunning and remarkable and refreshing. Linda in Boulder, Colorado writes, may he rest in peace and people can refrain from disparaging him now that he's passed. His faith was great, even if his social views were misguided. On the other hand, Chaz in Virginia Beach says, I've met Dr. Falwell. He was decent, passionate, and engaging. He had the strongest belief in his convictions of anyone I've seen, and I liked him very much. As always, to weigh in, just go to cnn.com/360blog and follow the links.
The problem with political religion is that it teaches people to treat old beliefs like facts. A preacher can claim divine authority, but authority is not evidence. Christianity says faith is the assurance of things hoped for in Hebrews 11:1. That is exactly the weakness. Hope is not proof. Science demands testing, observation, and correction. Religion often demands obedience first, then calls doubt a sin. That is how bad ideas survive longer than they should.
He's the pool boy whose affair with Jerry Falwell Jr.'s wife brought down an evangelical dynasty.
They have a public image, but behind the scenes, they're freaks.
Now he's telling his story in a soon-to-be-released Hulu documentary, God Forbid.
If I would have known that accepting this woman's invitation to go back to her hotel room would have led to a scandal involving the president of the largest Christian university in the world, I would have walked away and just enjoyed my private life.
Giancarlo Granda was working as a pool boy at the legendary Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami in 2012 when he says Becky Falwell, then 42 years old, began flirting with him.
Towards the end of my work shift, she's like, hey, would you want to go back to my hotel room? And as a single 20-year-old, I'm like, yeah, of course. And then she's like, but my husband wants to watch.
In his new book about the 8-year relationship, he describes that bizarre first encounter in a hotel room with Jerry Falwell watching. I told him, if you get jealous at any point, just let me know and I'll get the hell out of here. But he told me, don't worry about it. You guys do what you want to do. I kissed Becky, I picked her up and carried her over to the second bed. Jerry got up and walked to the side of the bed. I had a moment of near panic thinking, what is he doing? And I told him to back off. Afterward, they were elated that we'd managed to pull it off. She was buzzing electric and Jerry continued to giggle with excitement.
She's the hottest first lady at any college in the country.
When word of the affair leaked out in 2020, Falwell was forced to resign in disgrace as president of Liberty University, but their marriage survived.
Falwell Jr. has denied being involved in his wife's affair. The documentary God Forbid, the Sex Scandal That Brought Down a Dynasty premieres November 1st on Hulu.
Granda claims that Becky told him that her and her husband were at a swingers club the night before, so this is going back to 2012 at that hotel, but that wasn't their thing. They wanted a more intimate session. Both Jerry and Becky deny the allegations made by Granda. Jerry said that his wife Becky did have an affair, but he didn't watch. He says they've now reconciled. The affair caused Jerry to be depressed, and it's really been quite a struggle. It appears as though Jerry and Granda are in some type of real estate deal that didn't go as planned. Jerry said that Granda is trying to extort him. Granda says that he just wants to be bought out of this deal. So this is why Granda said that he's come forward with these allegations. Now, as a result of this whole mess and some other things that Jerry did in the past, he resigned as president of Liberty University. He had some trouble in the past where he had this photo where his pants were unzipped and he was with a woman whose pants were unzipped. She was pregnant. So things weren't really going well for Jerry Falwell Jr. before this happened with Granda. So again, these are just allegations. Really, they're allegations made by both sides, and the truth is not known at this point. If the allegations are true, I think the concern about Jerry Falwell Jr. is really the hypocrisy. As the president of Liberty University, he promoted values that are inconsistent with watching another man have sex with his wife. Granda isn't actually alleging that there was any criminal activity involved in this, right? So again, it seems restricted to hypocrisy. So stepping back from this particular case, because again, I don't know what happened here, I've seen a number of questions about the alleged activity, right? This idea of a man who enjoys watching his wife have sex with another man. To keep this description simple and straightforward, I'll refer to the couple as a husband and wife. I'll refer to the man who is invited to have sex with the wife while the husband watches as the guest. The terms used by people who engage in this activity are a little bit different. The guest is usually referred to as a bull. The wife is referred to as a vixen. But the term for the husband is dependent on his motive. If the motive is for the husband to be humiliated, he is referred to as a cuck. This is where we get the term cuckold relationship. If that's not his intent, like if he wants to participate and also considers himself to be an alpha male or a bull, the term stag is sometimes used. So over the years in my clinical experience, including supervising counselors who are providing direct service to clients, I've encountered a number of these situations. Most of the time when people talk about this activity, it's historical. So there's a husband, a wife, or a guest, and they're talking about how this behavior occurred 5, 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Every now and then it comes up as a current problem, an issue that one of the individuals wants to come to terms with or to resolve. Just to be clear though, this activity in and of itself is not pathological. It could be part of a pathology, but it does not have to be. When I have seen it as part of a pathology, substance use and paraphilic disorders seem to be evident more so than other disorders.
Here is where the mask slips. A university can preach purity, punish students for private behavior, and sell itself as morally superior. Then its own leadership gets surrounded by sex scandals, money disputes, and damage control. That is not moral clarity. That is control for the people below and excuses for the people above. Matthew 23:27 fits perfectly. Clean on the outside, rotten underneath. Religion keeps doing this because image matters more than truth.
This is the first time that we've been attacked on our soil. First time, and by far, the worst results. And I fear, as Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, said yesterday, that this is only the beginning, and with biological warfare available to these monsters, the Husseins, the Bin Ladens, the Arafats, what we saw on Tuesday, as terrible as it is, could be minuscule if in fact God continues to lift the curtain and allow the enemies of America to give us probably what we deserve.
Well, Jerry, that's my feeling. I think we've just seen the antechamber to terror. We haven't even begun to see what they can do to the major population. I mean,
the ACLU's got to take a lot of blame for this.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I'll hear from them for this, but throwing God, or successfully with the help of the federal court system, throwing God out of the public square, out of the schools. The abortionists have got to bear some burden for this, because God will not be mocked, and when we destroy 40 million little innocent babies, we make God mad. I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
Well, I totally concur.
I've since then been to Pakistan because I thought I'd better have a look. I've been to the Afghan front because I thought I ought to. I've been to Kashmir, where I think the next war will be if we're not careful about it. And I've come to the following conclusion. Mr. bin Laden made an absolutely horrific mistake when he did what he did. It's horrific in every other sense too, obviously, as I've just said. But what he has done is now called for a holy war against the Jews, against the Christians, against, naturally, the secular world, people like myself, against quite a lot of other Muslims, and now, not many people have noticed this, against Hinduism as well. In other words, he's just made 1 billion enemies in India. Furthermore, by doing what he did, he derailed something that was happening in Pakistan, a very horrible thing that was happening there. Sorry to keep using the word horrible, but I would say, quite soberly, that within a year, maybe less, if the World Trade Center had not been destroyed and the other atrocities in Washington and Pennsylvania had not occurred, the Taliban and its allies, including Al-Qaeda, would have taken over Pakistan. Pakistan was being very rapidly Talibanized through its military oligarchy and the religious parties and Muslim jihad groups it's been sponsoring. They won't get hold of the Pakistani state now. They won't. And they won't get hold of its nuclear weapons, which they were hoping to do. And you hear all the time that there's a lot of Muslim opinion that favors Mr. bin Laden and thinks of him as a hero. But what can he do for them? They can't go and join him in his cave, even if they want to. They can't go back to the 15th century with him or live in the desert with him either. What he demands of them is literally impossible. So there's absolutely no chance that he can win. I mean, you can exclude the possibility of the victory of evil. It cannot happen. And I think we might make some quite good friends in the battle against it. I would particularly recommend making a friend of the secular pluralist democracy of India, which has long been far too low on the United States list of countries to be well connected with. I think look forward very much to cooperating with India and repudiating tribalism, communalism, as the Indians call religious sectarianism. And so, I get up every morning thinking, what can I do today to join the battle for, and extend the battle for, secular pluralist democracy, and to inconvenience and humiliate its foes?
Our guest, Christopher Hitchens, who's also a contributing editor for this publication, Vanity Fair. This is what the December issue looks like. And inside, he writes, For Patriot Dreams, based on what the caller just brought up. We'll get a call from Dublin, Ireland. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I'd like to say to Mr. Hitchens, I enjoy his work very much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I was wondering how you look on Mr. Clinton's, President Clinton's, administration being somewhat asleep at the wheel with regard to bin Laden. I mean, it wasn't the first time bin Laden has struck.
No, indeed.
What do you think was his fault?
Well, I can refer you to a chapter in my book about Mr. Clinton, which a book is called No One Left to Lie To, in case you wonder what I think about him in general. What I think about him in particular in this chapter, which is called Clinton's War Crimes, is that he did one of the worst things any president has ever done. He used American cruise missiles in a covert and surreptitious decision that was taken against the advice of most of his Joint Chiefs and his intelligence chiefs and diplomats, ostensibly to bomb a terrorist facility, as they call it, in Sudan, but actually in order to try and fool around with public opinion on the day that Monica Lewinsky was going back to the grand jury. It was, as we say in Washington, a wag the dog moment. He picked a target, excuse me, he picked a target which he knew was not a military facility, that was actually a factory making most of the pharmaceuticals and medicines for Sudan, gravely damaging the fabric of that society. He shot another couple of missiles into what he thought was Afghanistan. In fact, one of them landed in Pakistan, accidentally revealing the connection between the Pakistani army and bin Laden, because the missiles killed a couple of Pakistani officers who had no business being in a bin Laden camp, but were training infiltrators for Kashmir. And having made a complete fool of himself, having been exposed before the United Nations as having hit the wrong target for the wrong reasons in a shady week where he was trying to avoid impeachment, he dropped the subject of bin Laden altogether.
This is where religious thinking becomes dangerous. After nearly 3,000 people were murdered on September 11th, Falwell pointed blame at secular Americans, feminists, gay people, and civil rights groups. That is moral rot. The attackers were religious extremists, yet he used the tragedy to attack his own culture war enemies. This is why religion poisons public life. It turns human suffering into a sermon, then calls cruelty truth. No evidence, no compassion, just superstition looking for someone to punish.
Now, I'm sorry, though, to have to begin by disagreeing with His Grace. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. Now, you might ask, you're fully entitled to ask, brothers and sisters, who am I to say that? Well, in the Jubilee Millennium Year of 2000, the Vatican spokesman, Bishop Piero Marini, said, explaining a whole sermon of apology given by His Holiness the Pope, that was supposed to cover the entire history of the Church in its Jubilee year, that, I'll quote Bishop Marini directly, said, given the number of sins we've committed in the course of 20 centuries, reference to them must necessarily be rather summary. Well, I think Bishop Marini had that just about right. I'll have to be summary too, but I think he said just about the least of it. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence, ranging from, I shall be summary, like Bishop Marini, the African slave trade, apologized for in 1995, the admission that Galileo was right about the relationship between the sun and the earth and other orbs, which came in 1992, one might add. No, I won't say, it's too easy to say better late than never. Here, I said it. To violence and torture, legalized torture. Torture was legalized and institutionalized by the Roman pontiff during the Counter-Reformation. That came in 1995. And for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah, as well as, in 1999, coming in just under the Millennium Jubilee wire, an apology for the burning alive in the main square of Prague of the great Czech Protestant Jan Hus. Since that big fiesta of forgiveness that began in, well, culminated, I might say, in 2000, fiesta of forgiveness, fiesta of asking for it, the papacy also asked to be forgiven for the sack of Constantinople and the massacre of Byzantine Christianity in April 1204 as part of the Fourth Crusade, the anathema on all Eastern Orthodox Christians as unbelievers, heretics, and people dwelling outside the health of the Church was lifted only in 1964. I call your attention to that. He also expressed sorrow about the murder and forced conversion of Serbian Orthodox Christians in the Balkans during the Second World War. And it doesn't end there. There are smaller but significant, equally significant, avowals of a very bad conscience. These have included regret for the rape and the torture of orphans and other children in church-run schools in almost every country on earth, from Ireland to Australia. And I'm pleased to see that due reconsideration is now being given, and may in fact have been given, to the hellish, I choose the word carefully, doctrine of limbo, St. Augustine's cruel and stupid disposal problem solution to a non-existent problem, that is to say, the destination of the souls of unbaptized children. Up until now, Catholic parents have been taught that's where their unbaptized children went, a form of torture that's sometimes worse than the physical. Now it seems that this piece of Augustinian sadism is undergoing reconsideration as well. But remember, this is from a church that, on the whole, cannot err. We still await a more direct admission. For example, I give some suggestions of my own while we're at it. I would like them to take back the Concordat made with Adolf Hitler, the first treaty he ever signed, giving the Church a monopoly over education in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Centre Party to give the Nazi Party a clear run. I'd have apologized for the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, myself, also the first treaty ever signed by that fascist dictator. I would also think I'd want to reconsider the fact that Father Tiso, head of the Nazi puppet state in Slovakia, was a priest in holy orders, that the Croatian fascist puppet state, the Ustaša state of Ante Pavelic, was also operating under full clerical protection and disguise, as was the regime of General Franco and the dictator Antonio Salazar. And I'd also want, I really think I would beg forgiveness for this, I don't think the German church should have asked Hitler's birthday to be celebrated from the pulpit every year until he died. These are very serious matters, and they're not to be laughed off by references to the occasional work of Catholic charities. But I draw your attention not just to the apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but to the evasive and euphemistic form that they take. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the Vicar of Christ on earth, says of Indians, of the Indians who were massacred in the course of conversion in Brazil, after the apology had been made to them, he said, nonetheless, it must be remembered that before we came to convert them, they were silently awaiting the arrival of the church. I don't think that's a very genuine kind of apology to you. In his comment, one of the few he's made on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he has said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry. They've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. When I say child abuse was institutional, how dare I say so? How can I prove it? How can I prove such a thing? Well, I'll ask His Grace, and I'll ask Anne Widdecombe. Where is Cardinal Bernard Law now? Where is he? Where is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, whose resignation was indignantly demanded, finally, by 50 members of the Church and by the whole laity of Massachusetts, who also demanded his prosecution for the promotion and protection and covering up and apology for and defense of people whose crimes against children are too revolting to specify. And he's not in the jurisdiction of Massachusetts now, as perhaps you know. He's the Supreme Vicar of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, personally appointed by the Pope to that as well as many other important sinecures. And in 2005, this man, a fugitive from justice and from complicity in the filthiest crime that it's possible for a human being to imagine, was one of those voting in conclave to decide who the next Vicar of Christ on earth will be. I don't know. I think I'd like to hear a bit more shame about this. I think I'd like to see a bit more confrontation with the reality of the business. Now, this is a serious question, as I've said. Anne Widdecombe very often, rightly, in my opinion, attacks the climate of moral relativism and of anything goes that can very well be the handmaiden of postmodernist, hedonistic culture. I very often am glad that she points these things out. But the rape and torture of children is not something to be relativized. It's not something to be excused as a few bad priests. It's certainly not to be excused by the hideously false claim made by some Catholic conservatives that this wouldn't have happened if queers hadn't been allowed into the church. I'm sorry to say that queerdom in the church is an old story too. And it's worse, it's much worse than pornography, and it's much worse than bad language on TV. And it's the crime that cries out for punishment. It's the thing that if we were accused of on this side of the house, we would die rather than admit. And if we were guilty of it, would kill ourselves. And it's the one thing the church has decided to excuse itself for under this papacy. The same euphemism comes in the term some Christians that is used in all the apologies about the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the anti-Semitic pogroms, and all the rest of it. It says some Christians fell into error. Some Christians allowed themselves to be deceived in this way and to act against the gospel. Well, anti-Semitism was preached as an official doctrine of the church until 1964. Do you think that might have something to do with public opinion in Austria and Bavaria and Poland and Lithuania? That the Jewish people were accused collectively as a people of deicide, of the crime of the murder of God in the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. And that anathema on them was not lifted until 1964, well after the perpetrators of the Holocaust had stood trial in secular courts and been rightly punished for their actions. How can this church say it has any moral superiority? It has difficulty catching up to what ordinary people regard as common moral and ethical sense, and it still can't make itself apologize properly, and I'll tell you why. Because, and I'll quote again from the encyclicals, it is said of the Crusades, of the complicity with the Holocaust, of the political and diplomatic alliance with fascism, of all of these things, it is said, well, violence was committed, but I'll stress this, I'll underline it, I'll quote directly, in the service of the truth. So how is an apology possible? How is any understanding or undertaking or firm purpose of amendment to be allowed when the original sin, so to say, the radix malorum, the fons et origo, the problem in the first place, is the belief on the part of this church that it does possess a truth that we don't have, and it does have a God-given right, a warrant, a mandate of heaven to tell other people what to do, not just in their public, but in their private lives. And until that is changed, till that fantastic and sinister and non-founded claim is changed, these crimes will go on repeating themselves, being partially denied, partially admitted when it's too late to do anything else, and covered up. Behind all these crimes and miseries is the denial of what we on this side of the house affirm, which is that the only little candle of hope that our species does possess, our poor, bare, forked, primate, mammalian species, of whom you have two such splendid examples on this side of the house and not bad on the other tonight, is the unfettered intelligence, the method of free inquiry in philosophy and in science, and the refusal to admit that any one person can tell you not to do that. It's the one thing I might say I think is, if not sacrosanct or sacred, is, shall we say, essential. And the Church has always stood and still stands against it. Now, in the little time remaining to me, I'll just propose a few more apologies that we might hope to hear in the immediate future. Because there'll come a time when the Church will issue apologies and explanations and half-baked appeals for forgiveness for things it's still doing. The readmission as a bishop of Roger Williamson, a member of Marcel Lefebvre's fanatical, hysterical breakaway sect, so-called Society of St. Pius X. Roger Williamson, found hiding in a reactionary, quasi-fascistic establishment in Argentina, has long been a believer that, I'll put this shortly, that the Holocaust did not occur, but the Jews did kill Christ. In other words, genocide no, deicide yes. He was quite rightly excommunicated some years ago, along with several other members of his ratbag organization. But Joseph Ratzinger's invited him back into the communion because to him, having this man, this liar, this fraud, this racist in the church is more important because it's church unity than the things that he said and done and continues to stand for. Is this not a crying scandal? I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. And the papacy was silent on this appalling occasion, and everyone in Rwanda knows it. And there hasn't yet been a properly written apology for that disgrace. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way.
This is the pattern with religious authority. Admit the damage only after the evidence becomes impossible to hide. The Church apologized for crusades, inquisitions, persecution, forced conversions, and abuse scandals centuries too late. That is not moral leadership. That is cleanup after power gets exposed. Falwell worked from the same playbook. Claim God's authority, judge everyone else, then demand respect when the system is challenged. The problem is the claim itself, that religion gets to rule private lives while answering to no real evidence. So here's the question. When religious leaders claim moral authority, but history keeps showing abuse, cover-ups, hypocrisy, and harm, why should we keep treating them as moral guides? Comment your thoughts below. And if you want more breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for the next one.